Greetings, fellow cultivators. Welcome to Autonova. Remember to like and subscribe to support the journey. Now, let's dive into the next chapter of A Will Eternal. Green hair burst out from the corpse caves, from the ground, from the plants and trees, even from the rocks, swirling through the air to form a huge barrier in front of Bai Xiaochun, which blocked Xu Zhaoshan's attack. A huge boom echoed out, and countless green hairs were destroyed. However, Xu Zhaoshan's attack was weakened significantly. Everyone in the area gasped, but then, before any cries of shock could ring out, numerous figures shot out from the rubble of the corpse caves, howling as they flew to stand in front of Bai Xiaochun. One zombie after another appeared. They all looked different, and had different levels of power and different types of auras. However, there was one similarity between all of them, and that was that they had green hair. Damn it, that's my refined corpse. Night Crypt, I'm gonna kill you. Impossible. Why is my zombie protecting Night Crypt? What's going on here? Night Crypt, are you looking to die? The crowd was in a complete rage. Many of them even pulled out their corpse-controlling jade slips, but they quickly found that they couldn't exert any control over their corpses whatsoever. Xu Zhaoshan's face was a mass of shock. His attack had been powerful, but there were now over 100 refined corpses standing in front of Bai Xiaochun. Even if he had attacked with more power than he did, it still wouldn't have done any good. Rumbling sounds echoed out as a few dozen corpses exploded. Then, the deadly fluctuations faded away. Bai Xiaochun stood there stock still, as he had been the entire time, looking around blankly. More refined corpses were crawling out of the rubble of the corpse refinery. Soon, more than 1,000 had gathered, clustered around Bai Xiaochun, all of them looking at Xu Zhaoshan and howling at the tops of their lungs. Earlier, everyone in the area had been crying out in shock, but now, they weren't uttering even a single peep. As the disciples stared at the strange scene, they began to slowly back up, their scalps tingling with fear. The raging, murderous aura that erupted from the ranks of zombies left them completely and utterly shocked. Xu Zhaoshan almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. As for the Grand Elder of Corpse Peak, he looked on with glaring eyes. After reaching Foundation Establishment, he had fought and struggled for years before finally becoming the Grand Elder of Corpse Peak, which he had presided over for more than 100 years now. Considering how many refined corpses he had seen over the years, he believed himself to understand more about them than even some core formation cultivators. However, what he was seeing now, more than 1,000 zombies all protecting Bai Xiaochun, caused his eyes to shine with intense light. How is he doing this? He thought. As for Bai Xiaochun, he stood there on the verge of tears. I'm finished, he thought. Kaput. I destroyed the corpse refinery, and then for some reason all these corpses decided to ignore their own masters and protect me. It only took a moment for me to offend more than 1,000 disciples. Is this gonna force me to abandon the sect? What do I do? What do I do? Bai Xiaochun was well aware that this was not the Spirit Stream sect. This was the Bloodstream sect, and he could only imagine what his punishment for this catastrophe would be. Maybe they would beat him to death. He could also sense the killing intent in the eyes of the surrounding disciples. However, it was at this point that, all of a sudden, the corpses behind him all howled, and then cleared a path. A tall, green figure appeared in the depths of the destroyed corpse refinery. As it strode forward, sharp claws could be seen, which glinted like razor-sharp blades. The bizarre-looking figure had green skin and protruding fangs which were terrifying to behold. It had a mass of green hair that was so long it was impossible to judge its length. Many of the hairs actually connected to other corpses, whereas some of it simply floated around in the area. Bai Xiaochun stared in shock as the green zombie walked forward to stand behind him, where it remained motionless, radiating a powerful, murderous aura. The surrounding disciples gasped yet again. That green zombie is controlling the other zombies. I can't believe it. Heavens. How come I never knew about green zombies before? This is completely unprecedented. That green zombie is incredible. It's only as strong as the 7th or 8th level of chi condensation, but look at how it can control all the other zombies. Simply terrifying. Xu Zhaoshan was left gasping at the sight, and soon, his eyes were shining brightly. However, before he could say anything, laughter filled the air, and its source was none other than Corpse Peak's Grand Elder. Wonderful, he said, sounding very excited. Simply wonderful. He blurred into motion, and a moment later, was standing right in front of the green zombie. Instantly, incredible pressure spilled out from him, causing all the surrounding zombies to tremble. However, they didn't stop their howling. The Grand Elder didn't seem to mind. He couldn't stop looking at the green zombie, almost as if it were a gem. He seemed to be getting more and more excited. You're called Night Crypt? he asked, turning to look at Bai Xiaochun, the same look in his eye as when he had been looking at the zombie. Bai Xiaochun didn't know who this person was, but he quickly put on a very serious expression. Clasping hands and bowing, he said, "Disciple Night Crypt at your service." "Greetings, senior. Let's call this an emerald zombie. Did you refine it? And how?" Bai Xiaochun blinked a few times. The truth was that he really didn't know exactly why the zombie refining process led to the zombie looking or acting this way. But he quickly recorded the formula he had used onto a jade slip, which he then handed over. After a moment of consideration, he performed a quick, secret test to see if he could connect mentally with the emerald zombie. Presumably, because the medicine contained some of his own blood, he could. In the hopes of reducing whatever his punishment might be, he also handed over the jade slip that could control the emerald zombie. Of course, he had already noticed the reactions of the other disciples upon seeing this old man, and how respectful their expressions became. Obviously, he was someone very important. The Grand Elder took the jade slips and looked them over. Eyes burning with passion, he laughed heartily, and then gazed at Bai Xiaochun with admiration. "Night Crypt, I am the Grand Elder of Corpse Peak. You did a great job here. Splendid, really. You created a brand new type of zombie. I need to go back to study the method for some time to determine how to reproduce it. You have performed a great service for Corpse Peak. So what if you destroyed a measly corpse refinery? They're easily replaceable. Besides, you didn't do it on purpose, and in the end, nobody was killed. Actually, even if you had accidentally killed some people, it would all have been in the service of the sect, and wouldn't have mattered at all. Elders, award him with 5,000 spirit stones and 30,000 merit points. Also, spread the word that anyone who dares to steal spirit stones from him will be considered my personal enemy." Laughing excitedly, and eyes shining with praise, the Grand Elder turned and left with the emerald zombie. "Huh?" Bai Xiaochun stood there watching as the Grand Elder left. The surrounding disciples were all enraged, but could do nothing more than grit their teeth and disperse. They had all seen the encouraging look in the eyes of the Grand Elder. One of the Corpse Peak elders walked over to give Bai Xiaochun 5,000 spirit stones, and also transferred 30,000 merit points to his identification medallion. Although Xu Zhaoshan wasn't very happy, he plastered a smile onto his face and hurried over to chat. From his wording, it was obvious that he hoped to get a copy of the formulas, so Bai Xiaochun magnanimously gifted him with one. After all, the formula was only in the early stages of development and wasn't really worth much. Xu Zhaoshan was delighted, and immediately gave Bai Xiaochun high marks on his mission assignment. Looking like he had just acquired a precious treasure, he hurried away. Bai Xiaochun looked at the emptiness around him, and the wreckage of the corpse refinery, and took a deep breath. He had been completely braced to be punished, only to have everything happen opposite of his expectations. All of a sudden, he realized that this place really was very different from the Spirit Stream sect. The Bloodstream sect is great. The Giant's hand is connected to my cultivation. I can work on the Undying Heavenly King much more quickly here than anywhere else, and if I cause problems because of pill concocting, the sect doesn't punish me, it rewards me. He sighed. Obviously, if he had done this same thing and not produced that zombie, then the Grand Elder of Corpse Peak would have been incensed. Most likely, not even death would have been able to wipe away the offense. All the Grand Elder cared about was the result. As for what happened along the way, he didn't care at all, not even what happened to bystanders. However, there was one thing Bai Xiaochun wasn't sure about, and that was whether or not the attitude of the Grand Elder of Corpse Peak reflected the attitude of the entire leadership of the Bloodstream sect. Or were there people who wouldn't tolerate him tormenting other disciples, regardless of the potential gains? Either way, the Bloodstream sect was essentially a devilish sect that valued being straightforward and merciless. They didn't believe that a person achieving their Tao could benefit everyone. They believed that success came only after climbing a mountain of bones. Sighing, Bai Xiaochun headed back toward his immortals cave. Now that he had accomplished his mission, he simply had to wait for all the other disciples to do the same, and then he would be able to participate in the Foundation establishment trial by fire. It was currently evening, and as he strolled through the sect, he happened to notice a huge stone stele off in the distance, roughly as tall as 3 people put together. A young woman was sitting cross-legged at the base of the stele, her hair and garments fluttering gently in the wind. There was something oddly appealing about her as she sat there. She wore a blood-colored mask, decorated with a plum blossom. As she looked off into the distance, a wistful, even melancholic expression could be seen in her eyes. Bai Xiaochun recognized her immediately. Lots of people in the sect gossiped about this very young woman, who was young Lady Shui Mei. As for the huge stone stele, it was oddly misshapen, as though it weren't complete. The more he looked at it, the more he realized that it looked like a section of a wall. It was actually a place where disciples of the Bloodstream sect would sometimes go to seek enlightenment, a location as famous as the Precipice of Never-Ending Blood. It was the Holy Pill wall fragment. Supposedly, people who sought enlightenment here could see a projection of someone concocting medicine. If they gained enlightenment, they would acquire a deeper understanding of the Tao of medicine. According to the story, the Bloodstream sect had looted the wall from the Pillstream sect 10,000 years ago. Although the Bloodstream sect didn't have many apothecaries, 8,000 years ago, a genius arose within the sect. He created a mystical medicine called the Undying Blood Pill, which shook the entire sect. Of course, he accomplished all of that thanks to the wall fragment. Few people ever gained enlightenment from the Holy Pill wall fragment. Even imposter Nightcrypt had tried his hand at it, only to fail. As Bai Xiaochun walked by, he couldn't help but glance at Shuimei and the wall. Shuimei seemed to sense him looking at her, and her eyes flashed beneath her mask. She looked over at Bai Xiaochun, radiating coldness and arrogance, as if she were a higher being, an immortal or a devil looking at an ant. Without saying a word, she turned and transformed into a beam of blood-colored light that shot toward Ancestor Peak. Being looked at in such a condescending fashion left Bai Xiaochun very angry. Shuimei was clearly far too arrogant for her own good. What's so special about you, huh? Lord Bai is already at Heaven Dao Foundation establishment. If I showed my true face, you'd be scared to death. Grumbling to himself, he stuck his chin up and flicked his sleeve. One of these days, Bai Xiaochun will snap his finger and reduce you to ash. Months flew by. Bai Xiaochun wasn't the only person to have already qualified to participate in the Foundation establishment trial by fire. However, the appointed time for the trial hadn't arrived yet, so those who accomplished their missions early were forced to bide their time. Bai Xiaochun didn't sit idly by during those months. He excitedly cultivated the Undying Heavenly King. From the time he had begun to practice cultivation until now, he had never felt like this before. He was under no pressure whatsoever, and was able to diligently focus on his cultivation. When he cultivated the Undying Heavenly King, his body was filled with a sensation of tingling pain. At first it was very uncomfortable, but by now he'd gotten used to it, and even found it somewhat pleasurable. Every day, he would spend some time shadowboxing in his Immortals cave to test out his power, and the result was always the same. Ha ha ha, I'm getting stronger and stronger. Bring on the pain. The sight of the blood chi rising up from the ground always caused his heart to pound with excitement. This place is my personal holy land. When I cause disasters, I don't get punished, I get rewarded. Plus, my cultivation progresses faster than ever. Sighing, he couldn't help but muse that the Bloodstream sect really was a good fit for him. However, after more consideration, he realized that his way of thinking was getting a bit twisted, and he needed to correct it. I'm from the Spirit Stream sect, he reminded himself. Then he sank down into the tingling pain. Eventually, he had completed 999 cycles of the Undying Heavenly King, whereupon rumbling sounds filled him, and the images of 3 huge mammoths appeared behind him. At that point, his eyes snapped open, and they shone brightly with enthusiasm. He unleashed a punch into the air, and a boom could be heard. He gasped. I've already reached the power level of 3 mammoths. This cultivation speed is crazy. Plus, I'm only on the back of the giant's hand. If I could get onto the fingers, maybe near one of those blood waterfalls, I could probably progress even faster. Laughing heartily, he rose to his feet to go out for a stroll. However, at that moment, his face flickered, and he slapped his bag of holding, producing his identity medallion. The medallion was glowing slightly, and when he poured some spiritual power into it, a cold, sinister voice rang out in his mind. Inner sect disciple Nightcrypt, you have earned the right to participate in a second Foundation establishment trial by fire. 3 days from now at high noon, present yourself at the Precipice of Never-Ending Blood to begin the trial. Bai Xiaochun's eyes immediately began to shine with anticipation. It's at the Precipice of Never-Ending Blood? Don't tell me the Foundation establishment trial by fire is going to be inside the Pit of Never-Ending Blood? The Precipice of Never-Ending Blood and the Pit of Never-Ending Blood were essentially the same place. Back when Bai Xiaochun asked imposter Nightcrypt about where to get sparks for 4-colored flame, he'd said that he should look for 4-leaf clovers in the Pit of Never-Ending Blood. Of course, of all the people who were waiting for the Foundation establishment trial by fire, he was the one who actually cared the absolute least about it. The only thing he cared about was that afterward, he would finally be able to call himself a Foundation establishment cultivator of the Bloodstream sect, and would finally become a Dharma protector of Middle Peak. That would be his first major step toward getting the relic of eternal indestructibility. The reason he didn't care about the trial by fire, of course, was because he was already a Heaven Dao Foundation establishment expert. Considering he was a disciple of the Spirit Stream sect, he knew that it was his responsibility to stand for justice and righteousness. Swishing his sleeve, he stuck his chin up. Looking very somber, he said, "This time, I can't let any of them succeed in Foundation establishment. Unfortunately for them, I'm a spy." After all, he was a loyal servant of the Spirit Stream sect, and as such, should take every opportunity to perform some meritorious service for his own sect. Feeling better than ever, he sat back down cross-legged to meditate. 3 days later, he made his final preparations, and then stepped out of his immortal's cave, attempting to look as cold and ruthless as ever. He had been working on his gaze recently, trying to make it look more murderous, and felt pleased with the progress he had made. The Precipice of Never-Ending Blood was one of the most mysterious places in the Bloodstream sect, the other being the Holy Pill Wall Fragment. It was a deep pit filled with blood-colored light that many people thought was an arcane pocket realm. The truth was that it was a wound which had been inflicted upon the hand of the giant, which had eventually transformed into a world of its own. 4-leaf clovers came from there, and could be used to spark 4-colored flame. Considering that they were unique to the Bloodstream sect, disciples often used them to trade for expensive items with people outside the sect. However, actually acquiring them required a bit of luck. The deep pit that they grew in was also occupied by blood beasts. Although the blood beasts weren't intelligent, they were driven by an insane desire to kill. Apparently, the enormous hand that the Bloodstream sect was built on innately bred a desire to destroy life. Therefore, any life form which entered that deep pit and encountered a blood beast would come under attack. When Bai Xiaochun arrived, he saw about 8 other disciples present. A few were sitting silently in meditation, and the others were conversing in hushed tones. Zhao Wucheng was there, and when he saw Bai Xiaochun, his eyes flickered with cold light. Although everyone present was a competitor, he smiled and beckoned Bai Xiaochun over. At the moment, everyone present was from the group that had failed in the Fallen Sword World. I heard more than 30 people qualified to join this trial by fire. However, there are only a few Foundation establishment pills. There's definitely going to be some fierce fighting in the pit, not only with the blood beasts, but also with fellow disciples. Yeah, but we have to stick to our earlier agreement. We'll wipe everyone else out first before we decide among ourselves who gets the Foundation establishment pills. As others chatted, Bai Xiaochun looked over at the pit of never-ending blood. The entrance was a narrow gap, only about 30 meters wide. Blood-colored light spilled out, and based on the aura that pulsed out, it was clear that terrifying entities existed deep therein. The entrance almost looked like a mouth ready to swallow up anyone who got close. There were even faint roars audible from deep inside. I heard that there are some blood beasts comparable to the Foundation establishment stage, Zhao Wucheng said. This place won't be any less dangerous than the Foundation establishment Holy Lands. Bai Xiaochun nodded in response. More people arrived and joined the waiting group, looking around coldly at their fellow disciples. Soon it was noon, and everyone who qualified to join the trial by fire had arrived, a total of 37 people. About that time, bright beams of light rose up into the air from each of the 4 mountain peaks, which then shot toward the location of the trial by fire. Coming from Lesser Marsh Peak was a tall, middle-aged man who radiated an aura of blood that caused everything around him to ripple and distort. The faint image of a hand could be seen behind him, a hand that looked very similar to the hand the Bloodstream sect was built on. Most shocking of all was that the skin of the man's own right hand was covered with what appeared to be faint cracks and crevices. This man was none other than the Grand Elder of Lesser Marsh Peak. The Grand Elder from Nameless Peak was a dwarf with short hair and a scarred face. He stood on what appeared to be a black cloud, but was actually a vicious-looking gargoyle that radiated shocking pressure. Bai Xiaochun had met the Grand Elder from Corpse Peak, the seemingly wrinkle-faced old man who actually radiated the life force of a youngster. Last was the Grand Elder of Middle Peak, who was the most eye-catching to Bai Xiaochun. She was an attractive young woman who somehow seemed incredibly mature. There was only one way to describe her attire: sexy and extraordinarily enticing. She had long, fair legs, and her rear end was so plump and curvaceous that anyone who saw it would do a double take. Her Taoist robe was so tight on her voluptuous figure that it seemed as if it might pop off at any moment. In addition to all that, she had long, bright red hair that made her seem like she was on fire. Although her oval face couldn't be described as beautiful, it was inherently charming, and her eyes almost seemed to be reaching out to seduce anyone who looked into them. Bai Xiaochun subconsciously sucked in a deep breath, and felt his heart beating rapidly. He quickly looked away and tried not to stare. She's the Grand Elder of Middle Peak? Song Q's aunt, Song Junwan? Unfortunately, he couldn't hold back from looking at her again, and to his shock, found her staring at him seductively. She smiled, and Bai Xiaochun instantly felt his scalp tingling explosively. For some reason, her gaze actually filled him with a sensation of profound danger. He quickly bowed his head. As soon as he looked down, Song Junwan's eyes flashed. Inwardly, she was actually quite surprised. Of all the people on the precipice of never-ending blood, Bai Xiaochun was the only one who had dared to look at her twice. Just as she had been about to punish him for it, he had apparently detected the look in her eye and lowered his head. As the 4 Grand Elders arrived, the disciples all clasped hands in formal greeting. Greetings, Grand Elders. Bai Xiaochun followed along with them, although inwardly he was sighing. Who would have guessed that the Grand Elder of Middle Peak would be a vixen like her? And to think that he had to get into her immortal's cave to get the relic of eternal indestructibility. It almost seemed impossible at this point. According to my plan, he thought, I eventually have to take her position as Grand Elder of Middle Peak. Even as he sighed inwardly, Grand Elder Song Junwan said, You are all people who failed in the Foundation Establishment Holy Lands. According to sect rules, you should have been punished, but after some discussion with the sect leader, we Grand Elders agreed to allow you another trial by fire. Foundation Establishment pills can be used to reach Mortal Dao Foundation Establishment. As for the success rate, it varies. Some people only need 1 pill, others might need 2 or 3. There was even once when a disciple needed 6 of them to succeed. With that, she pulled out a medicinal pill bottle, and then smiled in an extremely enticing fashion. It was a somewhat wicked smile, but that didn't make it any less beautiful. In fact, in some ways it made her even more attractive. After all, even roses have thorns. Within this pill bottle are 10 Foundation Establishment pills. As soon as the words left her mouth, she threw the pill bottle into the pit of never-ending blood. Let the fighting begin. You have 1 month, after which you will be extracted from the pit. Those who succeed in reaching Foundation Establishment will become Dharma protectors of whichever mountain peak you wish. All eyes were locked onto the pill bottle as it disappeared into the depths. Without the slightest hesitation, the entire group instantly transformed into beams of light that shot after it. I'm definitely going to earn the right to reach Foundation Establishment. I failed once, but I'm not going to fail again. I'm going to reach Foundation Establishment. We're allowed to kill people in this trial by fire, so anybody who tries to stop me from reaching Foundation Establishment will die. Rumble. Within the blink of an eye, all of the disciples disappeared into the pit, eyes bloodshot, ready to fight to the death. Bai Xiaochun was in the group, his eyes glued to the falling pill bottle. Once inside the pit, the blood chi inside of him surged, and he picked up speed. Almost instantly, he was in the front of the pack, along with 3 other disciples. Moments later, they had already reached the location of the pill bottle. Of course, Bai Xiaochun still couldn't use his Foundation Establishment cultivation base. If he did, a mere thought on his part could crush everyone else. But in the Bloodstream sect, he had learned to exercise the utmost caution at all times, so he only used the power of the Qi condensation stage. He also avoided using any of his magical techniques, to further avoid poking any holes in his disguise. In fact, due to his cultivation of the undying Heavenly King, he had plenty of blood chi inside of him, making him seem no different from any of the other disciples. Bai Xiaochun roared as he waved his right hand, unleashing blood chi in a powerful attack that spread out in all directions. The other 3 disciples in the area were forced to defend themselves, and as a result, slowed down significantly. Nightcrypt, you got some good fortune in the Foundation Establishment Holy Land and hid it from us, didn't you? You didn't reach Earthstring Foundation Establishment, but you still have power that exceeds the 10th level of Qi condensation. Seeing that Nightcrypt hadn't slowed down at all, the other 3 immediately joined forces to attack him. The disciples further back didn't seem to have expected this to happen, and yet weren't surprised. Zhao Wucheng's eyes flashed as he came to the same conclusion as the other disciples, that Nightcrypt had come across some good fortune that gave him access to greater power than before. Even as Bai Xiaochun sped toward the pill bottle, he forced some blood to ooze out his mouth to make it look like he was injured. At the same time, he put a crazed expression on his face. With one final burst, he closed the distance and grabbed the pill bottle. Any of the other disciples in this situation would have broken the bottle open, taken a few pills, then thrown the other ones off to the side to distract the rest of the disciples. In fact, that was what all of the other disciples assumed would happen. Even the 4 Grand Elders up on the precipice of never-ending blood also expected the same outcome. None of them were at all surprised to see Bai Xiaochun break ahead of the pack and grab the bottle. After all, most disciples of the Bloodstream sect had various trump cards to call upon, so a burst of speed was nothing beyond expectation. As for the Grand Elder from Corpse Peak, he had met Night Crypt before, and currently, his eyes shone with admiration. Of course, were it not for the events of a few months before, he wouldn't have paid much attention to Bai Xiaochun. However, what happened next left all four Grand Elders completely shocked. Instead of breaking the pill bottle open, Bai Xiaochun picked up speed and headed further into the depths of the pit. What are you doing, Night Crypt? Damn it, I can't believe he's doing this. Night Crypt, are you looking to die? Rumbling sounds could be heard as the enraged crowd chased Bai Xiaochun down into the depths. Even as the other disciples' killing intent soared, the four Grand Elders on the precipice of never-ending blood exchanged surprised looks. Then, their eyes began to gleam with keen interest. He's hogging the pills, said the Grand Elder of Lesser Marsh Peak, a burly man with a booming voice. His expression was rather ferocious, and yet his eyes gleamed with admiration. How bold. That's just the type of personality Bloodstream sect disciples should have. I never paid much attention to this kid before. What a pity he didn't reach Earthstring Foundation establishment, otherwise he would have become a major chosen. Song Junwan covered her mouth as she laughed, suddenly much more deeply impressed by Night Crypt. Very interesting. Presumably, many of that group of 30 would love to hog the pills, but he's the first one to actually attempt to pull it off. The Grand Elder from Nameless Peak, the dwarf, chuckled darkly. He's called Night Crypt, right? What a good name, and what potential in a disciple. If he really manages to cut off the Foundation establishment path for the rest of them, then I definitely want him for Nameless Peak. The Grand Elder from Corpse Peak laughed heartily. I remember this kid. He's a pure genius when it comes to refining corpses. He completely approved of Bai Xiaochun's actions. After the disciples disappeared into the depths, everyone turned to leave. I wonder if that hogger Night Crypt will still be alive a month from now. Hey, I already said that if he reaches Foundation establishment, I want him for Nameless Peak. Laughing and chatting, the four Grand Elders left. Down in the pit, Bai Xiaochun was racing along at top speed, intentionally causing blood to spray out of his mouth every once in a while to remind everyone that he was injured. However, he didn't slow down even a bit. Soon he was down near the bottom of the pit, and upon looking around, he found that it really was like a tiny little world. There were mountains rising up in all directions, all of which were covered with blood-colored vegetation. Off in the distance were some volcanoes that radiated intense heat and powerful rumbling noises. Furthermore, Bai Xiaochun could sense numerous dangerous and brutal auras rising up from various locations. Even as he hovered there feeling proud of himself, the other disciples began to arrive, bursting with murderous auras. You want to fight me over these Foundation establishment pills? He shouted. Dream on, Night Crypt, it's not right to be so vicious. You can't cut off our path to Foundation establishment. How dare you do such a thing? You're dead, humph. Offending this many people has earned you a death sentence. And don't even think about trying to hole up somewhere and reach Foundation establishment. This place isn't very big, and I've been here before, so I can definitely track you down. Bai Xiaochun didn't even look at them. As numerous magical techniques rumbled through the air toward him, he sped toward the region with the volcanoes. The pit of never-ending blood wasn't just used for Foundation establishment trials by fire. Disciples would also come here on missions to harvest four-leaf clovers. However, when going out on missions, the sect would make sure that the area wasn't too dangerous. As long as one was careful, one wouldn't face any mortal danger. In fact, imposter Night Crypt had even come here, and was relatively familiar with the area. The four-leaf clovers are in the volcano region. Eyes glittering, Bai Xiaochun sped toward the nearest volcano and vanished into a tunnel without even pausing. Even as he did, the other disciples closed in, enraged, roiling with murderous auras as they chased after him. Bai Xiaochun picked up speed as he flew through the countless passages and tunnels that riddled the ground underneath the volcano region. The area was almost like a huge maze. Because of that, none of the pursuers had any idea where exactly he was, which enraged them even more. They only had 1 month to track down Bai Xiaochun and get the Foundation establishment pills, otherwise they would be failures yet again. The mere thought of it was already driving them crazy. Their hatred of Bai Xiaochun had already reached indescribably towering heights. Don't be so selfish, Night Crypt. In the Bloodstream sect, the law of the jungle prevails, and we succeed by climbing a mountain of corpses. But you can't be this selfish. There are 10 Foundation establishment pills. Can't you at least spare one for somebody else? Hiding in the volcano region won't do you any good. The maze isn't that big. We'll find you eventually. Even as everyone's killing intent raged, Bai Xiaochun was searching left and right through the tunnels. Suddenly, he stopped in his tracks and looked at a crack in the wall up ahead, where a big patch of 3-leaf clovers could be seen. There in the middle of them all was a single 4-leaf clover. He immediately walked forward and picked it. Examining it closely, his face lit up with excitement. There really are 4-leaf clovers here. Ha ha ha, I can finally perform 4-fold spirit enhancements. After putting the 4-leaf clover into his bag of holding, he excitedly proceeded along through the maze. By this point, he'd forgotten completely about the foundation establishment pills and was completely focused on finding 4-leaf clovers. 4 days passed in the blink of an eye. Bai Xiaochun would occasionally run into someone in the maze, but was always able to lose them easily, and would then continue hunting for 4-leaf clovers. He also ran into some blood beasts. He spent a bit of time observing them, and quickly realized that they were fascinating. However, they were easy to avoid as he searched for 4-leaf clovers. Another 3 days went by. Eventually, he found a place where a large number of passages all converged. It was a huge chasm, several kilometers wide and filled with enormous mushrooms. The smallest mushrooms were as tall as a person, and the largest were fully 30 meters tall. The mushrooms were a very strange color, and almost translucent. They were also gently swaying in unison. Blood-colored 3-leaf clovers could be seen on the ground below the mushrooms. Upon closer examination, Bai Xiaochun found that interspersed among them were occasional 4-leaf clovers. Whoa, he said, his eyes shining brightly. It seemed like a wonderful place, and yet, he hesitated for a moment. Just when he was about to take a step in, his eyes went wide with disbelief, and he began to tremble. Not too far off in the distance, in the middle of a cluster of mushrooms, chomping on some 3-leaf clovers and looking around innocently, was a white rabbit. Bai Xiaochun almost couldn't believe what he was seeing. There was no way he could misidentify this particular rabbit. It was none other than the talking rabbit he had created back in the Spirit Stream sect. Bai Xiaochun suddenly felt like the world had become a very strange place. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that he would see the talking rabbit here. When he went to the North Bank, the rabbit appeared there. Then he came here to the Bloodstream sect, and the rabbit showed up here too. I came all the way here, and you're still following me around. There was something very, very strange about this rabbit. Thankfully, the rabbit hadn't noticed Bai Xiaochun. Ignoring all of the countless 4-leaf clovers, Bai Xiaochun carefully backed up toward one of the passages, his heart pounding in fear. I must not under any circumstances allow it to see me, he murmured. I can't let it know I'm here. Well, it shouldn't be able to see through my night crypt disguise anyway. Even as Bai Xiaochun prepared to make his silent escape, a roar echoed out as a huge blood-colored earthworm burst out from further in the depths of the pit and headed directly toward the rabbit. The rabbit leapt into the air and sped away from the earthworm with unmatchable speed. However, even as it took to flight, the ground exploded as more giant earthworms appeared, all of whom began to chase the rabbit. The rabbit's ears stuck straight up as it fled, and at the same time, it began to make huffing sounds that apparently were an imitation of the sound of the earthworms burrowing through the ground. Just as the rabbit was about to jump into one of the tunnels, it looked over in surprise at Bai Xiaochun. Apparently, it recognized him. When Bai Xiaochun saw the rabbit looking at him almost like a friend, he felt like his head was going to explode. Without any hesitation, he picked a tunnel and fled in the opposite direction. What is going on with that damned rabbit? He thought, nearly crying. He truly was afraid of the rabbit. However, this time, Bai Xiaochun was overjoyed that he had noticed the rabbit when he did. Otherwise, a slip of the tongue could have led to the entire Bloodstream sect knowing that he was Bai Xiaochun. The thought of that left him trembling. If they found out, they'd probably cut me into a million little pieces and send me back to the Spirit Stream sect in a box. Heart-pounding, he reminded himself again that the rabbit was behind him, and that he must not under any circumstances say too much out loud. I can't just wander around in the open. With the rabbit in the area, it's too dangerous. He quickly dug a hole into the wall of a nearby tunnel, then crawled inside to hide. Ah well, I might as well reach Foundation establishment now. That will make things much easier. Sighing, he crossed his legs and thought for a moment. Then he pulled out some other random medicinal pills, which he began to compare to the Foundation establishment pills. After a moment, his eyes shone with bright light as a new idea occurred to him. Meanwhile, in other locations in the maze, the other disciples were going mad. Their eyes were bloodshot as they scoured the tunnels. 10 days had already passed, and they had searched virtually the entire place. Actually, some of them were very close to where Bai Xiaochun was located, and were just on the verge of stumbling into him. However, it was at that point that he suddenly burst into the open, speeding away as quickly as possible, and simultaneously releasing a slight Foundation Establishment aura. All of the disciples were immediately enraged. He's breaking through to Foundation Establishment. Get him. No wonder we couldn't find him for the past 10 days. He was actually trying to break through. We can't let him succeed. Even as they converged to chase him, Bai Xiaochun sighed and then waved his hand, sending several medicinal pills flying out, all of which emitted the aura of Foundation Establishment pills. As he tossed them in different directions, he shouted, "Fine, take the Foundation Establishment pills. If anybody dares to cause problems for me, I'll wipe out your whole clan after I reach Foundation Establishment." Bursting with a murderous aura, he then sped off into the distance. Shocked, the disciples in the area sensed the Foundation Establishment aura on the pills, and quickly scattered to try to get them. Fierce fighting broke out instantly. The result was that the 5 strongest disciples got the medicinal pills, and immediately began to flee. Other disciples gave chase, and yet, it only took a moment before howls and curses rose up into the sky. Fake. This isn't a Foundation Establishment pill. Damn that night crypt. I forgot he could concoct pills. This is fake. It's a real fake. This isn't a Foundation Establishment pill. It's another pill coated with some dust from a real Foundation Establishment pill. Of course, none of the other disciples were convinced. They continued to fight over the pills that had been abandoned, until everyone saw for themselves that they really were nothing more than ordinary Tier 2 pills. At that point, their hatred for Night Crypt reached indescribable levels. Obviously, only an apothecary could accomplish something like that, and there were few apothecaries in the Bloodstream sect. Night Crypt, I'm gonna kill you. Furious, the disciples searched for another 10 days, until everyone was growing gaunt and disheveled. By now, there were only 10 days left, and everyone was nearly collapsing with anxiety. They were fighting amongst themselves, and also fighting the blood beasts, and feeling worse as time went by. Eventually, they found Bai Xiaochun. However, to their despair, he emanated a powerful aura of Foundation Establishment. Sticking his chin up, he waved his sleeve and loftily said, "What gall? How dare you fail to offer greetings to an important Dharma protector like me?" In the Bloodstream sect, rankings were strictly adhered to. After reaching Foundation Establishment, one was no longer a disciple. One could select one of the 4 mountain peaks to live on, and would also be named a Dharma protector. Those who reached Earthstring Foundation Establishment were even more powerful, and became elders. Of course, both elders and Dharma protectors were people who the inner sect disciples feared. In fact, their lives were completely in the control of such people. The Bloodstream sect disciples looked like they might cry at any moment. Despairing, they looked at Bai Xiaochun flicking his sleeve, and their hearts surged with hatred. Moments ago they had been clamoring about how they wanted to kill him, but now they had no other choice but to bow their heads deferentially. Greetings, Dharma Protector Night Crypt. Greetings, Dharma Protector Night Crypt. Everyone gritted their teeth and bowed their heads as they offered greetings. Bai Xiaochun was extremely proud of himself, but his expression was solemn. Chuckling darkly, he looked over the group. Suddenly, Zhao Wucheng gritted his teeth and said, "Dharma Protector Night Crypt, disciple is willing to give you everything I own in exchange for a single Foundation Establishment pill." Soon, everyone was echoing his words. No fighting broke out, they simply tried to ingratiate themselves to Bai Xiaochun to get one of the pills for themselves. To them, Foundation Establishment pills were indescribably rare. If they lost out on this opportunity, it could be a very long time before they got another chance. All they needed was one of those pills, and they would be qualified to make an enormous leap upwards. The mere thought of it had them all quivering with anxiety. A decisive gleam could be seen in Zhao Wucheng's bloodshot eyes. His clan was on the decline, and there were enemy clans who had recently acquired new Foundation Establishment cultivators. If he didn't reach Foundation Establishment soon, his entire clan could be wiped out, and likely him with it. With those thoughts on his mind, Zhao Wucheng gritted his teeth, dropped down and kowtowed to Bai Xiaochun. Then he pushed his finger down onto his forehead, causing blood-colored light to flicker as a drop of blood appeared. Shockingly, that blood actually contained a sliver of his soul. He was using a secret magic that he had happened upon long ago. Considering the current level of his cultivation base, using it caused a major backlash. Even as the soul blood appeared, his face went pale, and he coughed up a massive mouthful of blood. Then he looked up at Bai Xiaochun, voice hoarse and filled with madness as he said, "Dharma Protector Night Crypt. If you let me reach Foundation Establishment, I'll be your slave for a 60-year cycle." All the other disciples gasped, and they looked at Zhao Wucheng with mixed emotions. Although all of them deeply desired a Foundation Establishment pill, none of them were as decisive as he was. Their faces sank. None of them had any sort of magic that would let them produce soul blood, but even if they did, they wouldn't use it like this. Foundation establishment pills were rare, but there was no saying that they wouldn't get another opportunity to acquire one on another occasion. Shaken, Bai Xiaochun gave Zhao Wucheng a long look and then glanced at the soul blood. He was no newcomer to the world of cultivation and had heard of things like this before. After muttering to himself for a moment, he waved his hand, and the soul blood blew over and vanished into the tip of his finger. A very strange sensation suddenly filled him. He could tell that as of this moment, a mere thought on this part could end Zhao Wucheng's life. It was a terrifying level of control that was actually somewhat similar to his human controlling grand magic. After a moment of silence, he somberly said, "Zhao Wucheng." His grave expression caused the hearts of all the other disciples to tremble. Zhao Wucheng looked up, his eyes filled with respect. "I shall give you one foundation establishment pill, and no more." Bai Xiaochun had his principles. He waved his hand, and a foundation establishment pill flew out to Zhao Wucheng. All the other disciples looked on enviously. No one would dare to start fighting in front of a foundation establishment cultivator. Trembling, Zhao Wucheng grabbed the pill and then clasped hands and bowed to Bai Xiaochun. Then he walked forward, sat down cross-legged next to Bai Xiaochun and consumed the pill. As soon as it entered his mouth, he began to shake visibly, as if something volcanic were about to erupt inside of him. Bai Xiaochun looked at him for a moment, then retracted his gaze. Inwardly, he sighed. Even in the Spirit Stream sect, foundation establishment pills were hard to get. However, in the Bloodstream sect, they were even more valuable. Suddenly, he realized that there were many aspects of the cultivation world that were like that. There was a reason why the Bloodstream sect was so powerful. Disciples who grew up in an environment like that would end up far stronger than disciples from other sects. Some people might worry about the disciples' sense of belonging. However, as long as the sect was powerful enough, and did most things in the interest of the sect as a whole, anyone who threatened the rules of the sect would be crushed. The best thing was not to fight the trend, blend in, and use the rules to your advantage. Time passed. Just around the time that the 1-month time limit was over, rumbling sounds emanated out from Zhao Wucheng, and then the aura of foundation establishment erupted out. His eyes snapped open, and they shone brightly. His cultivation base was now a spiritual sea, and although it couldn't compare to an Earthstring foundation establishment, he did have a strong foundation in the mortal Dao level. The surrounding disciples had complicated expressions on their faces as Zhao Wucheng rose to his feet. Clasping hands and bowing deeply to Bai Xiaochun, he said, "Many thanks, Master." Bai Xiaochun nodded. At that point, numerous beams of light descended from above to surround all of the cultivators. Then a powerful gravitational force appeared, and they were hauled upward. Rumble. They flew up through the air, passing through the blood mist toward the outside. After the light vanished, they unleashed their cultivation bases and flew out of the pit toward the precipice of never-ending blood, where the 4 Grand Elders were waiting. Their gazes swept across the disciples, and came to rest on Bai Xiaochun and Zhao Wucheng. Zhao Wucheng stood behind Bai Xiaochun, looking at him respectfully. At the same time, the 4 Grand Elders also focused their attention on Bai Xiaochun. Very serious expressions could be seen on their faces. After all, they also had foundation establishment cultivation bases, although they were at the peak of the stage. At a single glance, they could see that something strange had happened. Night Crypt enslaved another foundation establishment cultivator? That was what they were all thinking as they exchanged glances. They had been impressed by Bai Xiaochun last month, and now that feeling was growing. If he had simply reached foundation establishment by himself, that would have been deserving of praise. But he had enslaved another foundation establishment cultivator as well. That went to show that although he had selfishly hogged the pills, such behavior wasn't fixed. He could be flexible, to get the best outcome that benefited him. Such an attitude and such actions fit exactly in line with the principles of the Bloodstream sect. The dwarf from Nameless Peak suddenly asked, "Dharma Protector Night Crypt, how many foundation establishment pills did you consume?" 2. Bai Xiaochun replied without even a moment of hesitation. The burly Grand Elder from Lesser Marsh Peak looked at Bai Xiaochun, eyes shining with praise. "What do you plan to do with the other foundation establishment pills?" "Oh, that." Bai Xiaochun's heart thumped, and he considered the matter briefly before continuing proudly. "My dream is to become an amazing apothecary. I plan to study the extra foundation establishment pills and see if I can replicate them. One of these days, I'll definitely produce my own foundation establishment pills. Right now, all I can make are Tier 2 spirit medicines." The other disciples looked on with bitter expressions, and the 4 Grand Elders seemed shocked. It had been a simple question, but the answer was filled with profound meaning that immediately solidified all of their opinions of Nightcrypt. The four Grand Elders' hearts began to pound with anticipation. A Dharma protector who could concoct medicine would be a very important figure, someone that Earthstring Foundation establishment elders might not even be able to surpass. There were always Earthstring Foundation establishment elders, but it was very difficult to get a Foundation establishment expert of any sort who could concoct medicine. The Grand Elder from Corpse Peak immediately regretted being so open with his praise before. At the same time, Song Junwan's heart was pounding as she smiled at Bai Xiaochun. "Excellent," said the Corpse Peak Grand Elder, eyes burning passionately. "Nightcrypt, your work with the Emerald Zombie shows that you have skill in the Tao of medicine. Why not come over to Corpse Peak? You are clearly connected to us by destiny." He had already been shaken by Bai Xiaochun, but now that he was in the Foundation establishment stage, he was even more impressive. Cut the crap," said the burly Grand Elder from Lesser Marsh Peak. Nightcrypt managed to fight off a whole group of opponents while only in the chi condensation stage. Clearly he's gifted in body refinement. "Nightcrypt, come to Lesser Marsh Peak. We cultivate devil blood body refinement. With us, you can truly step onto the path of becoming a powerful expert." But then the dwarf from Nameless Peak screeched, "Hey, don't even think of trying to steal him from me. Didn't I say from the beginning that Nightcrypt was coming to Nameless Peak?" Song Junwan from Middle Peak tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Eyes glistening, she said, "Junior brother Nightcrypt, why don't you come to Middle Peak?" To see the Grand Elders fighting over Bai Xiaochun caused the other disciples to fume bitterly and sigh in their hearts. Bai Xiaochun couldn't help but think about how outstanding he was. No matter how hard he tried to keep a low profile in both the Spirit Stream sect and the Bloodstream sect, he always managed to have people chasing after him. Vexed at the amazement of his own accomplishments, his eyes suddenly went cloudy, as if with infatuation. Staring at Song Junwan, and blushing slightly, he said, I pick Big Sis Song's Middle Peak." Thus, this episode comes to an end. Remember to like and comment so we can discuss the story together. Until we meet again in the next chapters.